They said the billionaire was gone, found lifeless beside his bed, a half-empty glass of water still in his hand. His wife screamed. His son called the lawyer before the doctor, and the housekeeper stood silent in the hallway, eyes full of something deeper than shock. But what no one knew, not even his own daughter, was that this wasn't an accident. This was a test. And by the end of it, not everyone would pass. Before we begin, tell me in the comments, where are you watching from? United States, Canada, UK, Australia, Jamaica? Silas Danner was a name that meant something in Texas. From Dallas to Houston, everyone knew the Danner Group, the freight, oil, and tech company that had built him into one of the richest men in the South. He had everything most people work their entire lives to touch: private jets, multiple homes, a sprawling ranch near Lake Travis, and a portfolio that made him untouchable. But behind that iron gate and marble driveway was something most people never saw: a man quietly dying inside his own success. It wasn't illness that weighed on him. It was loneliness. His mornings started the same way every day: the sound of distant footsteps echoing through a house that no longer felt like home. His wife, Ivy, was always busy: charity brunches, social galas, and endless photos for magazines that called her Texas' most elegant philanthropist. His son, Cole, had taken over one of the smaller divisions of the company, though most of his time was spent chasing deals that never closed. And his daughter, Jessa, worked in public relations, the only one of his children who seemed to have inherited his discipline. But even she kept her distance. Birthdays came and went with text messages instead of visits. Christmas dinners were silent, with everyone checking their phones, waiting for an excuse to leave to the world. Silas Danner was the man with everything to himself. He was a ghost haunting his own mansion. He'd built this empire from the ground up. He remembered the days when he and Ivy shared diner meals, laughing about someday having a place with real silverware. But time and money had changed her, changed all of them. Now, love had turned into obligation, polite, practiced, and empty. It all came to a head one quiet Thursday night. Silas was walking past the guest suite where Cole liked to stay when visiting. The door was cracked open, and he could hear his son's voice. Cole was laughing, drink in hand, talking on the phone with a friend. "Yeah, he's still kicking," he said, chuckling. "Old man's built like a tank. But the day he goes, it's a whole new world for us. You know what I mean?" Silas froze. He didn't make a sound, didn't push the door further open. He just stood there, hearing his own child talk about his death like a countdown to payday. That single line cut deeper than anything he'd ever felt before. When Cole left for the night, Silas walked back to his study. The walls were lined with portraits, him shaking hands with governors, signing million-dollar contracts, cutting ribbons at charity events. Not one picture showed his family smiling together. For the first time, he saw what his life had become. He hadn't built a family. He built dependence. That realization burned through him all night. By dawn, he made a decision that would change everything. He was going to find out the truth. Who really cared about him? Not his bank account, not the company, not the lifestyle. So he came up with a plan. Silas called in a favor from an old friend, a retired physician who owed him a debt from years ago. They met quietly at his ranch, far from the office, and Silas laid it all out. He wanted medical records created, test results that showed early-stage heart failure. He wanted a story that looked real enough to fool even his closest advisors. The doctor was hesitant, but eventually agreed. Within a week, Word spread. Silas Danner was unwell. The news didn't come from him. It leaked from a hospital email that accidentally reached one of his company's board members. From there, it spread like wildfire. At first, the reaction seemed caring. His wife suddenly cleared her schedule for quality time. Cole started calling daily, pretending to be worried, but always circling back to discussions about the company's future. Jessa, however, didn't call right away. She just showed up. When Silas saw her walk through the front door, holding a paper bag with homemade soup, something in his chest softened. She didn't bring cameras, didn't bring sympathy. She just said, "I thought you might want company." He didn't say much, just smiled faintly. For the first time in a long while, he felt something real. But even as she sat there, talking about small things, Silas knew this test wasn't over. He needed to see what the others would do, not just on the surface, but behind closed doors. So he went deeper. He instructed his lawyer to make subtle changes in his will, removing a few clauses, reducing Cole's shares, transferring power temporarily to Jessa for medical convenience. If his family truly cared, they'd show it in how they treated each other, not in how they pretended to treat him. That weekend, Silas called everyone home under the guise of a family meeting. They arrived in their expensive cars, all smiles and hugs. But underneath, the tension was thick. Everyone knew the rumor. The billionaire patriarch might not have long. As they sat around the marble dining table, Silas felt a strange mix of sorrow and curiosity. He wondered who among them would mourn him, and who was already counting the days until he was gone. That night, as everyone retired to their rooms, Silas stood alone on his balcony overlooking Lake Travis. The city lights shimmered across the water. He thought about how people talk about legacy, buildings, companies, money, but the only legacy that mattered to him now was love, and he wasn't sure he had any left to give or receive. Sometimes people don't realize how empty wealth can sound until there's no laughter left in the house. If this story feels close to something you've seen or lived, maybe that's reason enough to stay. Not for me, but for the truth hidden between the lines. And as the night grew quiet, Silas whispered to himself, if they care, they'll come. Not for the will, but for me. He turned off the light, unaware that the test he'd set in motion would reveal more than he ever wanted to know. In the following days, the story of Silas Danner's illness spread faster than wildfire in a summer drought. For the first time in years, his mansion in the Austin Hills became busy again. Phone calls, messages, flowers at the gate. But Silas noticed something strange. Every gesture felt rehearsed. His wife, Ivy, had posted a filtered photo of their wedding on her social media with the caption, "Praying for my husband's recovery." The comments poured in, not prayers, but compliments. People calling her strong, graceful, and inspiration. Not one comment asked about Silas. Cole, meanwhile, became the family's spokesman. He called business associates and board members, letting them know his father was taking time to rest, but that the company was in good hands. It didn't take long for those words to start sounding like a campaign. Silas watched all of this quietly from his study, feigning weakness, moving slower, coughing just enough to make the illusion believable. He told his staff to act natural. Only Martha, his longtime housekeeper, knew the full truth. Martha didn't like it. She'd served him since his first small office in Round Rock, back when he still did his own paperwork and wore cheap suits. To her, this game didn't sit right. But Silas insisted this wasn't about revenge. It was about truth. So she played along. When Cole and Ivy visited, Martha would open the door slowly, whispering, "He's resting, but you can go in." They'd tiptoe in like actors on a stage, speaking in soft tones, their voices dripping with concern. Cole would place an expensive bottle of whiskey on the side table, not that Silas could drink in his supposed condition, then sit down and talk about the future. Ivy would ask if he'd sign the trust updates she'd been suggesting. Silas would nod faintly, say little, and observe. It wasn't their words that broke him. It was their absence when the cameras weren't around. They came to be seen, not to stay. Only Jessa lingered. Every evening, she'd arrive after work, bringing dinner in old plastic containers. Sometimes she'd talk about her job. Sometimes she'd just sit and read quietly in the corner while he rested. There was no performance in her presence. She didn't look for the spotlight. She just didn't want him to feel alone. And that's what made Silas start to doubt his own plan. The test had begun as curiosity, but now it felt cruel. Pretending to be ill was one thing. Watching your loved ones fail, the simplest test of empathy, was another. Days turned into weeks. The news had reached the media, not officially, but through whispers. Sources close to the Danner family said the billionaire was battling heart complications. Investors grew nervous. The board started meeting without him. And Cole. Well, Cole saw opportunity. While Silas stayed bedridden, Cole began to position himself as acting head of the Danner Group. He met with partners, made speeches, and pushed new contracts. He claimed it was temporary, but anyone watching could tell he was settling into power. Meanwhile, Ivy had quietly started moving funds. The accountant, one of her close friends, told her she should prepare just in case. Silas had no idea, not yet, but the empire he built was already being carved up in anticipation of his death. Martha saw it all unfolding and couldn't hold her tongue any longer. One afternoon, while Silas sat on the porch wrapped in a blanket, she said softly, "Sir, they're not just waiting for you to pass. They're planning for it." Silas didn't flinch. He simply looked out over the hills, the Texas sky wide and endless, and said, "I needed to know, Martha. Now I do." But what neither of them realized was that things were about to spiral far beyond what he expected. A week later, a call came in from the hospital. Jessa had taken Silas's fake test results to get a second opinion. She'd wanted to confirm if there was any treatment, if he could be helped. The hospital, of course, found nothing. No file, no diagnosis, no signs of illness. Jessa was confused, then angry. She drove straight to the mansion, stormed in, demanding to know what was going on. Silas panicked. His plan was unraveling too fast. He begged Martha to keep her calm until he could explain. But when Jessa finally reached his study, she didn't find her father at his desk. She found Ivy and Cole arguing. Ivy was waving papers, asset transfers, property rights, even early access to trust funds. Cole shouted that she was moving too fast, that the company needed him in control before anything was official. And then, like a ghost in his own home, Silas appeared in the doorway, pale and silent. The room froze. No one said a word. In that single moment, the lie looked real. His family, the people who once hugged him for holiday photos, now stared at him like a problem they wished would just go away. Jess's eyes filled with tears. "Dad," she whispered, "what's happening?" He didn't answer. He didn't have to, because everything he needed to know was already written on their faces. That night, Silas sat alone in his study, realizing the depth of what he'd done. He'd faked sickness to test love, and uncovered greed so deep it made him question whether love ever existed at all. Outside, the Texas wind howled across the hills. Inside, the billionaire who once had everything was left with nothing but silence. And just as he started to think about ending the game, his phone buzzed with a message from his lawyer. "Mr. Danner, urgent. Your wife has initiated transfer of multiple properties under her name. Estimated total value, $48 million. She claims authorization due to your medical incapacity." Silas froze, the phone trembling in his hand. His own family wasn't waiting for him to die anymore. They were already taking pieces of his life while he was still breathing. The test had become real. The morning after the message from his lawyer, Silas didn't move for hours. He sat in that leather chair by the window, staring at the dry Texas horizon, the same hills he once dreamed over as a broke ranch kid who promised himself he'd never be powerless again. Now, surrounded by the wealth he built, he'd never felt smaller. The papers on his desk told a story he couldn't ignore. Ivy had already transferred to commercial properties and liquidated shares worth millions. Cole had filed documents to assume temporary leadership of the company, citing his father's declining health. Silas had faked an illness, but they were the ones killing him slowly. It wasn't anger that filled him. It was grief, that deep, hollow kind that only comes when you realize love had conditions all along. He'd raised Cole with everything a father could give: the best schools, a seat at the table before he even knew how to negotiate, endless second chances. And Ivy, she had walked into his life when he thought success meant loneliness. She brought laughter, charm, the feeling of being wanted again. But maybe that's all it ever was, a feeling. That afternoon, Jessa came back. She didn't knock this time. Her eyes were red, her hair messy, her heart broken in the way only children feel when they realize their parents aren't who they thought they were. She didn't ask for explanations. She just said, "You shouldn't have done this." Silas didn't argue. He simply nodded. He had created this mess, every bit of it. But then Jessa added, "You still have a chance to fix it." And that one line hit him harder than any betrayal ever could, because she didn't mean the money, or the company, or the headlines that were already starting to spread rumors about his condition. She meant the people he had lost while chasing everything else. For the first time in years, Silas drove himself to the old diner off State Highway 71, the place he used to go before success, before suits and drivers and board meetings. He sat at the same corner booth, the one with the cracked red vinyl seat. Martha had told the staff years ago to keep it just in case he ever comes back. He ordered black coffee, no sugar, no cream, the kind his father used to drink before heading out to fix fences on their small ranch. And as he sat there, alone but strangely lighter, he thought about what Jessa had said. Fix it. Maybe that's what he should have done all along. Not test, not prove, not trap, but fix. He started making notes on a napkin. Real plans this time. Not for expansion or takeovers, but for people. He'd fund scholarships for workers' kids, restart the ranch foundation that Ivy made him shut down because it didn't look profitable. He'd build something that mattered again. But before any of that, he'd have to face the truth. That evening, he called his lawyer. "I'm done pretending," he said. "Let's set things right." The next morning, Silas held a press meeting at the Danner Group headquarters. He looked frail, intentionally so. But this time, the frailty wasn't an act. It was weariness. He announced that his illness had been exaggerated, but that his family's actions had made one thing clear. It was time for accountability. He didn't name names. He didn't need to. Every reporter knew exactly what he meant The headlines that followed weren't about sympathy or scandal. They were about truth. Texas billionaire exposes his family's betrayal to teach a lesson on greed. The story spread like wildfire. Some called him cruel. Others called him brave. But deep down, Silas didn't care anymore about public opinion. He had learned what money could never buy: sincerity. That night, when he returned home, the mansion was quiet. Ivy had left, her closet empty, her ring left behind on the marble counter. Cole hadn't come back since the meeting. Only Jessa remained, sitting by the fireplace with Martha, helping her fold laundry like she had when she was little. As Silas stood there, watching the simple peace in that moment, something in him shifted. He finally saw what love looked like without condition, and it wasn't found in big promises or fancy gestures. It was in the people who stayed, even when the world turned its back. Sometimes, stories like this make us look at our own lives. Who's really there for us? And who's just watching what we can offer? If you've ever learned the hard way who truly cares, don't just keep that thought. Hold it close. Stay with stories like this one, the ones that remind you what really matters. The camera would hold that quiet moment. The man who thought he'd lost everything, realizing he still had what was real. But peace doesn't come easy, because while Silas began to rebuild his heart, the world outside was still watching, and one headline in the morning would shatter the fragile calm he'd just found. Cole Danner claims fraud, says his father, manipulated public, and plans to sue for control of Danner Group. Silas froze when he read it. The test wasn't over. The next chapter was about to begin, and this time, the consequences wouldn't just be emotional, they'd be public. By Monday morning, the Danner name was everywhere. Business channels, gossip sites, newspapers. What started as a private test of loyalty had exploded into a public scandal. Cole's lawsuit hit like a THUNDE or CLAP. He accused his father of mental manipulation, claiming Silas's staged illness had defamed the family and destabilized the company's reputation. It was a brutal move, one that Silas hadn't seen coming from his own son. Every network ran the same clip. Cole standing on the courthouse steps, tailored suit, camera-ready, grief on his face, telling reporters that he was heartbroken, but determined to restore integrity. He painted himself as the victim of a cruel game. Silas watched it all from home. His hands didn't shake this time, only his heart did. He'd thought exposure would bring truth, but instead, it brought chaos. He had underestimated how far greed would go when pride got involved. Jessa begged him to stay quiet, to let the noise pass, but silence had cost him enough already. This wasn't just about the company anymore. It was about what kind of man he'd leave behind in memory. For weeks, court hearings followed. Lawyers argued, reporters speculated, and public opinion swung back and forth like a weather vane. Inside that courtroom, Silas didn't see his son. He saw a reflection of the boy he once loved, a child who grew up believing love had to be earned through success. And maybe that was his fault. He had taught Cole to win, not to care. He had built an empire on strength, not compassion, and now he was reaping the lessons of his own design. When it was Silas's turn to speak, he didn't read from notes. He didn't even raise his voice. He simply said, "If my son believes I'm unworthy of his trust, that's not something I can argue in court." The room went silent. Even the judge paused, unsure whether to comfort or condemn him. Outside, reporters chased him for statements, but he said nothing. He drove home to a house that no longer felt like home, rooms to large, walls to cold. It was strange how success could make space feel emptier once the people were gone. That night, Martha brought him dinner and asked softly, "Was it worth it?" Silas didn't answer right away. He looked out over the Austin skyline, the lights flickering like stars caught in fog. Then he said quietly, "Maybe not for me, but for him, maybe someday it will be." Because deep down, he didn't hate Cole. He pitied him the same way you pity someone who can't tell the difference between love and inheritance. Still, the damage was done. Investors started pulling out. Board members began to resign. The empire Silas built was crumbling, and everyone assumed it was the end. Everyone except Jessa. She stood by her father, publicly defending him when no one else would. She called out the hypocrisy, the way people praised Cole's ambition while ignoring her father's honesty. She told the press he didn't test them to humiliate anyone. He just wanted to know if love still meant something in this family. Her words went viral. People started to see the story differently. Some saw Silas as a manipulator. Others saw him as a lonely man who just wanted to be loved for who he was, not for what he had. But the truth didn't stop Cole. He doubled down. In one last attempt to prove his father unfit, Cole called a board meeting to vote Silas out permanently. It was held in the same conference room where Silas had signed his first $1 million deal 20 years ago. Now, the faces around that table looked colder, younger, loyal to numbers, not to people. Cole stood at the head of the table, confident, rehearsed. He read his proposal, citing emotional instability and breach of corporate ethics. When it was Silas's turn to respond, he didn't even look at his son. He simply said, "If leadership means stepping on family, then maybe I don't deserve to lead anymore." The room went quiet. One by one, the votes came in. 8 in favor of removal, 2 against. And just like that, the company that bore his name no longer belonged to him. But what no one realized, not even Cole, was that Silas had already made one final move. Weeks before the meeting, Silas had transferred ownership of several key assets into a new trust. Not for himself, not even for Cole. It was for Jessa, and not just her, for the workers, the ranch hands, the scholarship fund he promised to rebuild. He had already given away the part of his empire that mattered most, the part built on decency. That night, Cole celebrated his victory in downtown Austin, surrounded by people who told him what he wanted to hear. But back at the mansion, Silas sat on the porch with Jessa, both of them wrapped in quiet. He wasn't angry anymore. He was free. Yet just when peace began to return, a black car pulled up the long driveway. A woman stepped out, one of the paralegals from Cole's legal team. She looked nervous. She handed Silas an envelope. Inside was a note, handwritten by Cole. It read, "I didn't know what she did until it was too late. Dad, I need to talk to you. Please." Silas froze. He didn't know who she was. Ivy, maybe? Or someone else involved. But what he did know was this: the story wasn't finished. The test had taken everything from him. But it might also lead to redemption if he could find out the truth before it destroyed what little family he had left. 2 days after receiving Cole's note, Silas found himself driving down a quiet back road on the outskirts of Austin. The old Chevy truck he chose instead of his usual car hummed low against the wind. It was the kind of drive that gives a man too much time to think about choices, pride, and how easily love can get tangled up in power. Cole had asked to meet at a diner outside town, the same one where Silas had once sat weeks earlier, nursing black coffee and regret. The sun was setting, casting gold light across the parking lot. And for a second, Silas almost turned back. He didn't know if this meeting would bring peace or more pain. But when he saw Cole step out from a car, head down, no entourage, no arrogance, just his son, he knew he'd made the right choice to come. Inside, the diner was quiet except for a jukebox humming old country songs no one really listened to anymore. Cole slid into the booth across from him, eyes heavy. For a long while, neither of them spoke. It wasn't anger holding them back now. It was everything unspoken between them. Finally, Cole said, "It wasn't all Ivy." That one line made Silas's chest tighten. Cole went on, explaining how after the staged illness came out, Ivy had begun working behind the scenes to secure every bit of the estate. She had lawyers, documents, hidden accounts, things even Cole hadn't known about until it was too late. She'd convinced him to go public, promising it would protect the company from his father's mistakes. But when Silas revealed the truth, Ivy disappeared, and Cole realized the lawsuits and power plays had only helped her take everything she wanted before vanishing overseas. Silas listened quietly. There wasn't a trace of "I told you so" in him. Instead, what filled his face was sadness. Not for the money, not for the betrayal, but for the years wasted teaching his son how to win instead of how to love. He said softly, "You made mistakes, son. So did I. The difference is, I had time to see mine. You still do." Cole's voice broke when he whispered, "I didn't just lose the company, I lost you." Silas reached across the table and placed a hand over his son's. It was the first time he'd done that in years. No lecture, no condition, just presence. He said, "You never lost me. You just stopped looking." The words landed heavy, but healing. They sat there until the waitress came with 2 cups of coffee, the kind that tasted like burnt beans and hope. And for the first time in a long time, they drank in silence that didn't hurt. Over the next few weeks, things began to settle. The lawsuits were dropped quietly, the story faded from the headlines, and the Danner name slowly stopped being tabloid fuel. Cole sold off a few properties and started something small, a tech fund for small-town entrepreneurs. He called it the Margie Fund, after his grandmother, the woman who once told Silas that family isn't who benefits from your success, it's who stays when you fall. Silas kept his distance from the business world. He spent his mornings walking the ranch, feeding the horses, and writing letters, not for investors, but for Jessa and Cole. Sometimes, on quiet evenings, all 3 of them would sit out on the porch. No lawyers, no money talk, just the sound of cicadas, a Texas sky, and peace that had been a long time coming. Silas had lost everything the world measured: his company, his reputation, his illusion of control. But what he gained was what most billionaires never find: the truth that money could never buy, love that didn't need proving. Family that learned forgiveness the hard way, and a story that began with a lie, but ended in something real. As the camera of the story figuratively pulls back, an emotional pause fits naturally here, the final guilt trip style outrow reflection that hits the heart. It's strange how sometimes we have to lose everything before we remember what really matters. Silas thought his wealth would reveal the truth, but it was loss that did. Maybe that's something we all learn eventually, that love doesn't show up in your best moments, it shows up in your worst. If this story touched something in you, even a small part, don't just move on. Stay close to stories that remind you of what's real, because maybe, deep down, That's what we're all searching for.